Morning, good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Daniela Pierre. I am the chair of AFC Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Commission. Collectively, we are an engaged group of members serving in Florida's 28 colleges in varied capacities with a focus on fostering leadership, professional development, and equal, equitable, accessible, and diverse work environments for all. As many of our college campuses make preparations to return to a new normal, workforce and classroom settings, campus safety and law enforcement are essential components in all phase return efforts. Looking at the national and international movement against racial and social injustice taking place all around us, today's discussion will focus on the importance of campus safety and law enforcement through the lens of social justice on Florida's 28 college campuses. We are delighted to have our distinguished guests with us today, Chief Ed Book, President Matt White, Interim Executive Director Marsha Kiner, the AFC team, and all of you that are gathered with us on this Zoom call today. Our discussion will be moderated by none other than Captain Ryan Woods. Captain Woods has served at Santa Fe College Police Department since 1998. After, after moving up the ranks,
That just makes me sound old.
Many years of credible service. Thank you so much for all that you do. After moving up the ranks, Woods was promoted captain in 2016. As captain, he is in command of all police operations, which includes sworn and non-sworn functions. Captain Woods is also a long-time devoted AFC member and was the very first chair of the Campus Safety Commission. Joined on our panel today, we are blessed to have Alexander Jordan, who is part of the Florida Division of Colleges. Again, we have Captain Ryan Woods, and we also have Alina Lawson joining us too. Momentarily, we will have also Dr. Gregory Salters, who is serving as the interim executive chief with Fort Lauderdale Police Department. At this time, to get started, I will now turn the Zoom floor over to Captain Ryan Woods.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, we had a great turnout. I'm really proud of that part of the number of folks we have on the webinar so far. Just to get started, you know, I got like 50 questions I'd like to ask, but in reference of time, I'm narrowed down to a few, and hopefully we get good discussion out of those. So let's just get started. The first question is, with the goal of providing law enforcement training, North Carolina Community Colleges, they launched a system called Impartial Policing Initiative back in July. And this training gives their officers a sense of diversity, equity, and inclusion with a focus on other cultures with implicit or explicit bias. And the question is for our panel, is that something the Florida college system should implement? And if so, I got a follow-up part about that. At what level? Do we do it in service or do you do it in the academy? You know, so, and Alexander just took off when I asked the question. Oh, he's back. So, oh, and Dr. Salters, I see has joined us as well. So, to reiterate to our panel, is that something that the Florida college system should think about implementing in our training?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Jordan, for those who may have joined the group this morning. I want to thank AFC for allowing me to be part of this morning. But that's a very interesting question, Captain Woods. back in October of last year, I had the luxury to assist some, I guess they would say, graduate students who was working with the North Carolina Community College on initiatives. They reached out to me and inquired what and how does our system is set up to address campus safety on our 28 colleges, because we don't have the same number. They have about 60 more colleges than we do, but they have about the same amount of students that they serve. And I was able to assist them, and I did not know that this was eventually going to turn out to be what that process was. They were reaching out to numerous states just to identify. And I think it would be great to have it in service for our respective institutions, because it allows us to have more control on the process than what we actually would have if it was external. And I think that's something that we need to probably look at. I know that Chief Book and several others may have had this in mind or conversation maybe before, when they saw this question or identified what some of the other states were doing as part of their proactive approach on campus safety. This kind of business, we have to be proactive, as Ms. Lawson and Chief Book and Ryan, we have to be proactive in our approach in campus safety. And that would be a very good idea to move forward with it being in service. That's just a little bit that I would have to share. I'm open to hear what others may have to say as well on this panel.
Dr. Salters?
Most definitely. For those who don't know, Dr. Salters, I'm a assistant chief of Fort Lauderdale Police Department, and I guess my unique perspective is I did my dissertation work on the impact of racial profiling on Black males seeking jobs in law enforcement, committing law enforcement careers, and I really appreciate the opportunity for being here. And Daniela, Miss Pierre invited me, and I'd met her doing some other things in her other career. And we talk about the network, and it's very interesting here talking from an educational standpoint and discussing the implicit bias. You'll have two reasons, as Jordan just stated. If you do not have implicit bias as your in-service training, are we missing an opportunity, and are we opening ourselves up for liability for something that we could have done on the campus to address the students? And then also, we have to also understand that many times your campus police will be interacting with your local police to administer law enforcement on your campuses. So now when you're having the implicit bias, we're also dealing with how does it impact your student population. Can you imagine if we don't have the implicit bias and it's your law enforcement officers that are on your campuses that are acting on their implicit biases and negatively impacting your student population? Because one thing that we deal with students, and we're building enrollment, kids want to feel safe physically and from a law enforcement standpoint on your campuses. So when you actually are doing this, some students may say, I will prefer going to University X because their cops have received this type of training, and parents will feel more comfortable having students at your institution because of that kind of training. So I think it will be building a goodwill. And the implicit bias, and I was running today, as a matter of fact, I'm teaching procedural justice to the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. Procedural justice, and everybody communicates if you connect, and that's something I do all over. So I'm looking forward to being here and being a resource for you guys. And when you look at it also, you must look at the cost. So as you're doing this training on your campuses, what is going to be the cost, meaning the staffing needs, the back staffing that you're going to need when you're bringing everybody in, and the methodology of the training. Will it be virtual training? Will it be in there? And will you be running through scenarios? And you may even have scenarios on your campus that have happened that can be used to show people's implicit bias.
All right, thank you, Doc. Ms. Alina, what's your thoughts on that? Coming from, and for those of you that don't know, she is the chief investigator for our Public Defender's Office in the 8th Judicial Circuit. I won't go all into what she did at GPD. That take the whole rest of our time. But need to say she's very knowledgeable and very adept in the law enforcement field for many years. So, Ms. Alina, what do you think of the first question?
Thank you. And I guess I have the unique blessing to have worked on both sides, being a police officer for more than 21 years, and also now working on the other side as the chief investigator at the Public Defender's Office. I agree what the two panelists have already said. I just want to take it a little further than that. In addition to training, we can train, but until we look at and measure, is it actually working? We have to have a system in place to ensure that these implicit biases training here locally. I'm in Gainesville, and here locally, there's a lot of training. They get the training, but are we holding the officers accountable when they are not practicing the training that they've gotten? So I think that in addition to the training, I agree that there needs to be training, but the students also need to be comfortable. And even you didn't mention mental health, but if
next.
Okay, I'm sorry, I won't go there then. But when you get the training, then you need to measure and make sure the training is working. And if it's not working, then you need to go back to the table and determine what needs to happen to ensure that the citizens that the officers are serving are actually feel like they're being treated fairly, that the training is actually working.
All right, thank you. Follow-up question though I have for that, Ms. Elena. What is the measure we use to show that it's working? You say, yeah, we need to show that it works, but what will we use? Are we talking just what IA, or are we talking what to say that the training is not working, or is it working? What do we use to measure it?
One of the things you mentioned is internal affairs. We won't use acronyms because our listeners may not understand what we're talking about, but we're talking about internal affairs, complaints against the officers. There are systems in place to measure or provide caution flags and red flags when there are issues with officers. There are some officers that may get complaints, get a lot of abuse complaints, excessive force complaints. They may not be founded, but the fact that they're getting those complaints. Also, one of the things that I don't think law enforcement does enough is collect data. They have the reports. They need to collect more data to determine what type cases that are being investigated, how many are actually self-initiated by the officer versus how many they are responding to from calls that went to the 911 system. Look at all of that data and then determine where you need to go, whether it's working or whether it's not working. And holding an officer accountable definitely ties into the internal affairs system.
All right, thank you. That kind of falls in another question I had real quick, and that's for all the panelists. What measures work best to promote a collaborative relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve? And that can be municipalities, that can be county and campus law enforcement. What works good? What are we doing right? We always talk about what we're doing wrong. What are we doing right?
I'd like to jump in there and take a stab at that one. One of the things that we look at is, so many times we look at law enforcement as so different from other particular businesses and organizations. One thing I say that we have to do, I tell people they must know you, like you, and trust you in some of the training. So one, what are we doing from a law enforcement standpoint? It can also be the same thing with the universities. What are we doing to let the public know us and know that we're out there? Even if you look now with this COVID, a lot more people are dealing with the virtual reality, a lot more people dealing with social media. So we're becoming a lot more aware of individuals. So one, what is it that we do? Then now that they know us, now we have to be doing things that cause them to like us. So whether it is from a law enforcement standpoint and we are participating in virtual meetings like this to discuss things and bridge the gap between law enforcement and education, which is one that I think really needs to be bridged. Law enforcement and education, we can stem the school to prison pipeline. We can deal with the educational realm, because right now when people deal with implicit biases, we talk about it from a law enforcement standpoint, but implicit bias really is with everything. I saw how it was in the chat basically dealing with what you are judging based on a preconceived notion. Because sometimes people have a preconceived notion that if they do not attend Harvard, their college education is less than, when a lot of times you need to be looking at it. Sometimes the smartest and most gifted individuals went nowhere near Harvard. So we have to look at it and deal with those implicit biases, show people what it is that we're dealing with, and also be available. Sometimes we look at our ability of not being open or transparent when you're talking about procedural justice, the fairness that you need, the impartiality, the transparency, and giving voice to the public. I might need to just come over to your college and say, what is it that you all need from law enforcement? How can the city help you guys? And we work together on common issues, because we all have some common issues we can work on together.
Thank you. One thing you did mention, I would like you to elaborate on, the school to prison pipeline. Elaborate on how significant that is and how young that starts with certain underrepresented folks in our communities.
Okay, and this is one of my cohorts when I was working on my dissertation did hers on this. But when you look at it, they will tell you that prisons are being built based on the educational level of individuals in 3rd grade. So when you're looking at it, if you're looking at people that are getting suspended or in trouble in 3rd grade and they begin building prisons, then that whole pipeline is there. Then also you can have it to where when you're dealing with your schools and talking about diversity, so you bring somebody from the suburbs to teach in your urban schools and they're unaware of the culture that goes on there and they're basically culturally incompetent. That means that when Gregory Salters talks a lot, they're thinking he's being disruptive when I'm just really being assertive. So therefore, they will get upset with me and they'll send me to Mr. Alexander's class while the teacher is talking and she's preparing them for a test. And then they'll say, okay, we're getting ready to get the test. Go to Mr. Jordan's room, bring Greg back. Well, Greg knows you gave the answer to the test and you give him a study session. So now I'm in 3rd grade and really mad. So now what happens, I continue going on. I'm good in sports, but I can't play sports when I get in high school because I don't have the grades. And now you have all these outstanding junior colleges, but I have to have the grades to get there. But because I talked in 3rd grade and they didn't realize I was being assertive, then they sent me to the office and it begins a pattern. So therefore, my level of success has been reduced. And in high school, as you know, people drop out when they do not have a sense that they're going to graduate. So the teacher does not like me means that the teacher came from the suburbs, she's here, doesn't understand me, doesn't like me, and the kids do not move forward. We begin to have a lot of them. Then you wonder why they don't have individuals doing research at the doctorate level to discuss these issues. That's because if they can't get out of elementary school, or high school, or college, you know they can't make it to their doctorate. So it is a lot of things that go into play here. And even within your elementary K through 12, when they started documenting teachers, they would start disciplining them for writing up kids too much. So then you had the silent suspensions to where they wouldn't write them up, they just send them out of the classroom. So basically the student is disengaged. We could have a whole discussion on that and what the colleges could do to address those issues and how that can be dealt with, and even school to prison pipeline. If I get arrested by the cop and charged with a felony drug charge, even if it wasn't mine, that impacts my ability to get grants. So if I'm from the inner city and I got a felony drug charge, whether it was I got it or not, I can't get a grant. And there's no way to measure, as the good doctor was saying, whether or not my arrest was based on racial profiling, because there is no singular definition of racial profiling and no singular method to document that.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Jordan, what do you think we could do to combat some of that at the community college system? You know, because we talk about curriculum and we talk about, you know, being good and innovative and all that. So what do you think we at the college level, at the 28, could do to try to help curb some of that stuff that these people are coming to us with these problems?
Well, Dr. Salters, that was well said. And one of the biggest things that I would like to elaborate on what Dr. Salters and Ms. Lena Lawson said was that the trends, and that just start first to answer your question, Captain Woods, the trends, the issues that we are encountering at our respective institutions, the school to the prison pipeline issues, How are we, are we interacting with our institutions out in the community? Does our community reflect the demographic of our institutions? Does our institution reflect the demographic of our communities? Are we doing enough in our community to go in the inner city? I'm an alpha of my fraternity. We get involved in our community. We try to bring the students into a program to allow them to know education leadership at an early age. That going back to what Dr. Salters mentioned. So for our community colleges, we can be more in our community. Tallahassee Community College right here in my backyard. We can be doing more in the inner city. We can be doing more at Santa Fe. But is we're willing to step out into that inner community where that people have that perception that goes back to what we're talking about. Do we have the trust of our leadership in our community? Do we have the trust of our law enforcement in our community? Do we have the trust of our own selves? And so we have to put ourselves in a position to allow our own individual students in our community to have that trust. And that goes back when they're 5 years old, 10 years old, and have a better understanding that law enforcement here is to help you, not to stereotype you, not to put you in the systematic racism issues that we're faced across our nation today. But what are we doing in our community to make our institutions be more stable in our community on a positive standpoint? And that goes back with Chief Gibson, Chief Book, the rest of our chiefs in our community colleges being more involved in our community to eliminate that stereotype or that racial profiling, or those some of the same things that we have all know that has been a common trend most recently in the light of what's going on nationally.
Oh, and one thing, I knew it was something I liked about Alexander Jordan. We're both men of Alpha Phi Alpha. So one of those things that we looked at when we talk about defunding the police, we have to look at that and how will that, and we're having this discussion from an educational standpoint, from a college standpoint, what does that mean when we're defunding the police? I look at it as that is a slogan that individuals are using and not really dealing with what the facts are. It is really a reallocation of funds, which has been going on since the beginning of time with budgets. Yes, so don't think that we're just going to get rid of police departments, and those that are being eliminated, many of them were in the process of being eliminated for various reasons before. It had nothing to do with what's going on. So when you're looking at it right now with the colleges and universities, as Brother Alexander stated, how many times have we as colleges partnered with our local communities to go back in? One of the programs, I was a DARE officer. So how many times have you gone in and started a program that would be a feeder system into your colleges, which is a patterning with law enforcement and going in and teaching a class? How many times have we done that? I know here in South Florida, we have a few colleges that reach out, and we say that we're trying to do this with Broward College and Miami-Dade College. We're reaching out, and that's where I've met Ms. Vieira. She was down there at Miami-Dade, and I was dealing with when the FBI came in and did a class with the juveniles at Miami-Dade College. And that was one of the things. Have you thought about these federal agencies coming in, doing classes, a 2 or 3 day seminar, and you bring your kids together, and now you're building your brand of your college so they will want to come there to do stuff and partner with law enforcement. And that's a low cost or no cost endeavor.
And you know, there's always grant money available to do those initiatives within our college. We have some great grant writers at our respective institution, so that should be easy to also have it sustainable year after year if there is willing to lead that down the path.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Ms. Lena, can you talk about what we do here in Gainesville with Noble as far as trying to work with law enforcement and the community? And explain what Noble is first.
Okay, and I do want to tell these Alpha men that my son is an Alpha, and he's over the mentoring program in, where does he live? Polk County, Lakeland.
All right,
So
that's definitely neck of the woods.
I have some connection with you guys because my son is an Alpha man, but I have a better connection with Miss Kiner because we are Zeta ladies. So Noble, Noble is National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and there's a chapter down in South Florida. I don't know whether Dr. Salters is a member, but I know quite. Oh, good. I know quite a few members of the South Florida chapter. Our chapter here locally is called the Atkins Warren chapter, and And Noble nationally has a program called The Law in Your Community, in which we go out and present a program to discuss what's the expectation of the citizens if they have an encounter with police, and what is the expectation of police. And if police do not meet those expectations, what you should do after the encounter, not during the encounter, but after the encounter. And the bottom line is we want everyone who has an encounter with police to go home. That's what we stress, go home. But one of the things I wanted to mention too is that we have to remember on college campuses, I supervise some college students who want to get in law school. I supervise undergraduate interns here at the Public Defender's Office, but we have to recognize generational differences. And sometimes we as adults who have all this experience and all these degrees, we think we know what's best for these students or for young people. We have to engage them by bringing them to the table. And we mentioned this in our last Noble virtual meeting. I was the supervisor of the community-oriented policing team as a lieutenant at the Gainesville Police Department. And we were out in the community. We thought drugs were the issue. And when we had a community meeting, they're like, no, the light is out. The kids are having to catch the school bus in the dark. We need the street light out. And the kids are speeding through the neighborhood. Drugs may have been third or fourth on their list. So we have to be open and transparent, that we invite people to the table. And as law enforcement, we have to treat people as if they were our family. Sometimes we forget that. If we respect each other as a citizen, respecting law enforcement and law enforcement respecting citizens, the encounters that we have will not go awry. So we have to keep that in mind.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna switch gears because you brought up something earlier that I wanted to ask the question about, and this goes for all of us. This is really important. I think sometimes we don't talk enough about it. National discussions on mental health calls. What level of training do police officers get, recognize and handle these type of calls? And what more can we do so that we can get the proper training we need to assist and mitigate some of these problems that we have when we interact with folks? Mental health calls, basically not necessarily criminal calls. These are mental health calls, but we as law enforcement is the first one having to respond to them.
Well, you know, here in Gainesville, the Gainesville Police Department actually has a partnership with Meridian Behavioral Health. And when they know it's a mental health call, they actually respond. So there had been training between Meridian and some of the law enforcement officers. So they actually dispatched the Meridian Behavioral Health worker on some of these calls to help mitigate. And the Sheriff's Department is actually in discussion with that now. How we got a new sheriff coming in January, but they are in discussion trying to do the same thing. Now, one of the things that I found disturbing, and I actually had a discussion yesterday with one of our attorneys, is that we're representing a client now that spit on a healthcare worker at the mental health ward at a hospital, and he was arrested. And so I'm like, well, he's on the ward because he has mental health issues, but yet you call the police on him. And we have probably in our office now, we probably have 10 cases in which they knew they had mental health issues, but they chose to have them arrested rather than treat them. So we can get training after training after training. You can't treat common sense. I don't know how you treat common sense, but there has to be some accountability with even the healthcare workers when they're dealing with mental health, to recognize that they're there for help. They're there for treatment. Would you want your family member arrested just because they may have shoved the nurse or the CNA or whatever? I can go on and on about that, but I'll be quiet.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, got a question. When I went through the police academy way back in the days when we all rode horses, we didn't have any, I don't remember hardly any mental health training. Now, of course, moving forward, our department does a lot with crisis intervention training, and all of us have that 40-hour training. But going back to the curriculum in the police academies, are they going to develop a bigger block dealing with mental health?
That's a very good question. And looking back at the Law Enforcement Mental Health Act of 2017, which helped agencies to identify ways to provide more training within the respective law enforcement training perspective. But my biggest concern is working with law enforcement. When I work with agricultural law enforcement, and we went out into the woods here in North Florida or Central Florida, and we had a meth lab that's going on, and a gentleman may be out there high on meth. It's totally different when you go into someone's residence who has a mental health issues, and law enforcement is there to try to calm him down, restrain him, keep himself safe at the same time. But how do we continue to interact with this, that we're not getting a black eye? Because a lot of times when individuals go to someone's residence to arrest them or find out what may be going on, we get a black eye for that. And that also starts back with training. How do we approach an individual who may be in that mental health issue or that capacity? So what we need to do is identify what is some of the issues that we have encountered. That goes back to what Ms. Lawson mentioned, data. What is the common trends that the law enforcement are encountering when they're going to someone's home? And then that allows the Law Enforcement Act of 2017, that I feel that is not solid, to have some of those issues identified there to better put our law enforcement in a better position when they're approaching individuals with mental health. Our mental health issues are totally different from what a K through 12 issue is, because we may have an adult on our campus that may one day have a mental health breakdown. And what do we have in place as strategies to ensure that that individual does not hurt an additional student, does not hurt themselves on our watch, but also keeping our law enforcement, our respective institutions safe. We have to remember, we only have 6 law enforcement agencies of our 28 institutions. The rest of our institutions have hired staff or they have a contract vendor. And they're definitely not prepared to deal with someone on our respective institution in that major or that capacity. So that's where that I kind of sway a little bit towards all 28 needing law enforcement's presence. But then we know that there's a budget, because I deal with the budget with our 28 institutions. So I see our issues and I understand what some of the concerns may be for our respective institutions, maybe like a Florida Gateway, who very small, that can use the local sheriff department, or Chipola, who can use the local sheriff department because of the size of their nature of their institutions. But we then have to identify what are some of the data that would help us identify how to address when we approach individuals at our respective institutions or within our community that have mental health issues.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Dr. Salters, what is Fort Lauderdale Police Department? Do they have a mental health unit? I know Broward County does, but I was wondering about Fort Lauderdale itself.
Interestingly enough, we do not have a mental health unit, but we do have the crisis intervention training. We also have the crisis intervention, and that the CIT, crisis intervention training, deals with what we deal with externally. We also have our crisis intervention stress debrief team, which deals internally with our officers, because as you also know, in law enforcement, the suicide rate of officers is very high. We also have hired a psychologist internally to deal with the issues within our department, because as you know, the officers going under stress can have issues, and that can affect how they do work. So we're dealing with it on the inside as well as on the outside. We also work with Henderson Mental Health Clinic that's down here that works with us for some of the assessments. And I guess the other thing that we look at is, I definitely agree that more training can be done in the mental health area and how we deal with mental health. But also we have to realize that I think sometimes when we're dealing with the public and we talk to them, We don't really discuss the issues of those that are going through mental crisis. And because they're going through mental crisis does not mean that the situation cannot be dangerous or volatile for the law enforcement community. Sometimes individuals, and kind of like the one that just happened with Mr. Prude in that case, my prayers go out to his family. When you were going out there and we're dealing with these cases, is there more that could have been done? Should we have done different things? We can all play Monday morning quarterback and we can set in place policies and procedures, but what should we do when going through these particular things? And some of it isn't really a mental health issue and how they would deal with it, because as you notice in that case, it appeared as though they were talking to the gentleman, they were calming him down, they were putting things under control, and then things happen. And those are some of the things that we really need to talk with. And also what we have here from a mental health or on the spectrum with autism, we do have an autism program that we put in place, and we've trained individuals on that. We've met with families. We have stickers that we put on individuals. They sign up with us, and we put the stickers on the doors of the houses. So therefore, when officers arrive at the house, they know that there's someone there that is on the spectrum. We also put that on our dispatch call. So when they go to Gregory Salter's house, we know that he is registered and there's someone in the house that is on the spectrum. So we put those particular things in place and put that training there, so that therefore the officer is a little bit more aware of the situation that they're going into. So that might be something that the other agencies wish to deal with and might want to consider putting those things in place. And as you know, even on your college campuses, there are different programs that you have for individuals academically to help them due to whatever additional needs they may have. I don't know what is in place to deal with those same individuals that may have issues on the spectrum or mental health issues that will help when law enforcement comes in contact with some of your students.
Thank you, Dr. Son. I had a follow-up, but now I'm gonna go to another question real quick. You know, community relationships are very important to public safety. And, you know, how do we get to the point where the pendulum swings back toward trusting our public safety officers? How do we get to a point where it's a shared community trust that everybody has the common goal of safety and security without it being adversarial to the point where there's no communication? How do we get back to that point?
Let me put it like this. It starts with defining safety, and that's one of the things that you have to look at. You also have to look at the history of law enforcement and how it started. When you go with it, the history of law enforcement, many people want to go back to Sir Robert Peel, which was not on the United States. But the history of law enforcement in America is different than the history of law enforcement elsewhere. So when you look at the history of law enforcement here, you started back with the slave trade, and you had those individuals that were your trustees and were identified as the ones that were bringing the property back to the owners. So when you start back there with the history and know from whence you came, then you can begin to see where we're going. And then from there, we went to the era of where we had it, where you had height and weight requirements, because the job of law enforcement was largely physical. So that was 6 feet, 185. And even before that, when you look at it, our Constitution was written for white male landowners. So if you were not a white male and a landowner, you were basically an amended individual. So therefore, when you look at that history, you can begin dealing with the issues that we're dealing with right now. So when you're talking about it and you say safety and security, that is what some people argue they are doing when certain things occur. Because when they say, see something, say something, when I see something, it's kind of like going to a restaurant. I might like seafood, you might like steak. Does that mean that one needs to be thrown away? No, it means that we need to understand what it is we have and have some commonality. When they call and say an individual was suspicious, just like up there in Georgia when the young man was killed, some people thought that he was suspicious because he went into an open house that was under construction that other people had gone into, but they just didn't look like him. So we have to understand and come to some common goal, because your question, when you ask people, they will justify it by stating that that is what they were doing, acting in the safety of the community. And that's where it's kind of funny. Here we have our new police chief, our interim police chief. Her name is Karen Campbell. And when Karen Dietrich. So when she got into the office, the memes went out. They got a Karen. And for those that are unaware, the Karen is the kind of the slogan or the
I get
stereotype
it.
now of the blonde white female that
Mhm.
calls the cops on any Black individual in the community. So when our chief was Karen Dietrich, we kind of had to deal with that. So that's some of the stuff that we have to deal with, is what is safety, because each college campus on here right now has a different community. So we must be familiar with the community of each college when we're out there administering law and determining what is suspicious and what goes on here. And that's dealing with the cultural competence of your particular university or community. That's true community policing.
Thank you. Ms. Salino, your thoughts?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
We're talking about how to build trust in the community. You know, because he's talking about, and I mentioned safety and security, and as Dr. Salter clearly indicated, it varies from community to community. And I was just wondering, what was your thought on what he had elaborated on?
I agree with what he said, actually. And he's right that each college has a different culture. I'm a big advocate of trying to hire locally. A lot of times, if you hire locally, the students know that person, that officer will have investment in the community. They know their mama, they know their grandmama, you know, and they build that trust that way because they know each other, they respect each other. And again, I'm a big advocate of bringing people to the table. We have to, our recruitment process, our hiring process needs to be revised based on this new generation of people. And we have all these high-level people sitting on these OR boards. We need students on these OR boards. We need to incorporate and actually have them at the table to say, these are the kind of officers that we want for our campus. And I think then you'll have more of a buy-in because you have student leaders advocating for those officers, advocating for a peaceful environment, a non-biased environment. So I'm all for transparency and making sure you have the right people to the table when you're making these decisions.
Very good. I see we got about 15 minutes left. Marcia, do you think we should now open up for questions from our visitors, so to speak?
Yes, I do. And there were several really good points in the chat. So let's go over here. And I know our president, Matt White, mentioned there's so many, like I said, really good points in the chat. Matt said, Matt, if you can speak up.
Well, he could just tell us, that'd be a lot easier.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I know we've got campus security, kind of law enforcement on this call, but you know the flip side of that, at all of our colleges, I know my college, we have a law enforcement academy. What about and workforce is hot, you know, these days. I mean, everybody's trying to get people into the workforce program. So what about, I wonder if there are any funding or grant opportunities to improve the training, you know, of our officers as we're training them now to go into the workforce kind of thing, you know, tying in the like I said, people looking at the workforce thing and you know, the workforce programs at each of our campuses.
Alex, do you know if there are any grants available?
There are several grants available through, I'm part of the FDLE Domestic Security Task Force, and Chief Book and Captain Ryan Woods participate periodically in that initiative with us. Currently, right now, we're working with our respective institutions on a grant for our interoperable communications. So there's opportunities for the institutions to get grant funding through FDLE DSOC. And that's something that our respective directors of law enforcement, campus security, and the law enforcement are fully aware. But it has to take that initiative, and it goes back to what we mentioned earlier. The colleges have to get involved with the community up front. They have to be proactive. So you got to be proactive in identifying that this is something that we want to do at our respective institutions, or else it won't get done. That's, trusting that we can get something moving within our community because our respective presidents feel that this is a need. I saw on a question someone mentioned, how does Black Lives Matters
Yes.
impacts all of this?
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to where that we identify what are some of the common issues within our community. We need to go from protesting to policy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are the issues that are out there being stated and factual, and what we can do to address it from a policy standpoint? Because as they state, history repeats itself. And we're at that point right now that history is repeating ourselves. Back to 1968 to 2020, it's really nothing has changed. It just went around in a circle. And why it went around in a circle? Because there's no policies in place to truly address why we're protesting and why something needs to be done, because there's a policy tangible to hold people and individual accountable. And if we don't hold individual accountable, it's just blowing in the wind. I'm out there protesting because I want equal opportunity for everyone to have the right for quality of living, residents, not a position where the individuals cannot eat and surviving check to check. A lot of this needs to go back to where the workforce. Are we getting down our community to bring in the African American community in Polk State area, where that Polk State is a high area of African Americans? Are we bringing those into getting them those workforce jobs, to getting them opportunities to be successful? What are we doing? Are we holding ourselves accountable at our respective institutions?
Captain, can I build on what
if I
Mr.
may?
Gordon said? I'm sorry, Dr.
Chief,
Salters, go ahead.
No, Chief, go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, I was just thinking what Mr. Jordan said, I really wanted to build on. So the tone, the demeanor, the civility, the tenor that you set for the way that you interact with the community you serve has everything to do with the way that we police or provide campus security. So when Lieutenant Lawson was talking about, she was 100% on point when she said, we have the training, we have the professional development. The question is not, do we have the professional development? The question is, what do we make sure that our people are accountable for once they receive that professional development? And I know at Santa Fe College, we start, from day one, whether it's a sworn or civilian person, you are part of the college. You are part of the college community. There's a cliche called the thin blue line. I don't think people understand it well, but we say the thin blue line is really a thick blue line. It's us, our entire community on one side, and that tiny percentage of people that break the law on the other side. We're all together. We live here, we work here, we play here. So the manner in which you set the tone with your people, you start with, you're going to be ethical, you're going to serve this community, you're not going to discriminate or harass, and you're going to be civil and professional and respectful and courteous. You start with that on day one, you generate the training that backs it up. There's no tolerance for anything else. And that's how you become part of your college community. And that's how you support an effort like Black Lives Matter. Or in our area, one thing that we have is we typically have discrimination based on gender and orientation. Those are two of the biggies also. We can't tolerate that. Not police, not campus security, not a single college official. And you start with those tone setting, and that's how you really become part of the college and provide a safe campus environment. That's not a cop issue. That's a college community issue.
And if I may chime in there also, when you talk about Black Lives Matter, I think as all things, kind of like in research, we must define it. Because sometimes we're talking about the philosophy of Black Lives Matter, and as one person wrote before, and we've discussed it, it says Black Lives Matter too, T-O-O, because when we're having the relationship between law enforcement and Black and brown people, it appears as though their lives are not valued as much. Whereas you may find some videos that are out there to where law enforcement officers have gone through much more hands-on with individuals that were not Black or brown, and the individual was not shot. And we also must understand the impact and the algorithms within social media and what's being shared or not shared. We could be fanning the fires because of what social media is saying and not addressing the others. That's there. So one, we must address Black Lives Matter, are we supporting the philosophy of Black Lives Matter too, or are we supporting the organization Black Lives Matter, which was started by 3 lesbian Black females after the Trayvon Martin deal? And I think that sometimes we are confusing the two or just using it as a generic term. And then we also have to look at it as when they're talking about these individuals that are tearing down things. I was here in command with Fort Lauderdale when Black Lives Matter came. It was Black Lives Matter individuals that had 4 of their individuals standing in front of the door of our police department, not letting them damage anything here at the police department. They, in fact, stopped one individual that was coming up with a rock to break the thing. We were watching it on camera. They stopped him, took the rock, sent him away. They cleaned the area after they left of all of the bottles and everything that was there. They had their disbursement get-together prayer that happened at about 6:30. Then after that is when all hell broke loose. So, but will they be attributed for everything that happened after they broke? Yes. You also have some of these things where it said Black Lives Matter, but some of the individuals, if they were African Americans, they must have been from South Africa because they look like some of the other individuals that are on this Zoom when they were damaging the cars and things down at the Miami Police Department in their garage.
Thank you. Marsha,
Captain Wood.
Right.
minutes.
There was a question about faculty. Alex, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I would just wanted to, I saw a couple of individuals had their hands up, and I don't know if they were putting their hands up for questions, Marsha. I don't know how it was working. I know Margie, McGee, and I think Jean.
Okay. Marjorie?
It was just a thumbs up, no question, or a clap, that's all.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mine was just a thumbs up too.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome.
Because I want to be able to hear what you guys have to say as well, besides just a thumbs up. Because one of my boss, who is my mentor as well, always talked about those 4th and 5th questions. You know, you come in there, you prepared to answer those 3 or 4, but you better be prepared for those 5th and 6th questions, right? So my question is to everyone on this: what is the outcome of this panel? What are we going to do, Dr. Salters? What are we going to do, Lieutenant Lawson? What are we going to do, Captain Woods? What are we going to do, Marshall? Is the Florida college system, are we going to take lead in our own community? Because our colleges are really the face of our communities.
Right.
All right. So my questions for you guys to think about: what is the outcome of this panel discussion when we get finished? What are we going to do? Are we going to sit on our hands? Are we going to hold ourselves accountable? Or are we going to be proactive and make a change? Because we're educators, but we educators also got great law enforcement presence in our community who can make a difference based off what the climax in our communities are right now. Black Lives Matters. I have a son. I have 2 wonderful daughters. I'm an African-American man. I'm blessed. I've been blessed. But what are we going to do for those that follow behind us, Dr. Salters?
Well, I can tell you this. You all have my word that anytime you all need me for anything, just as when Ms. Pierre called me for this, I'm here. I am ready to get into it if we want to take it to a scholarly level and we can start discussing all types of things dealing with various modalities, and we can start dealing with how Du Bois deals with us in our duality as we understand that we value or we look at ourselves as we see ourselves and our awareness of how others see us. We can get into all of that and a lot of the power and privilege issues and go all of that, because all of this can be some operant learning. So once I learn that people treat me like this, then I'm not going to go over there, you know, and B.F. Skinner breaks it on down for us. So we can deal with it on a scholarly level, a law enforcement level, or dealing from a Black male perspective. I'm here to help our communities go to the next level.
I like to see it from all 3 levels. Why? Because one of them it's side by side.
That's that triangle.
Correct. And you know about the triangle, Doc. So,
almost definitely.
So that's how I see it.
Alex, there's a great question I see in the chat. I have to scroll back up. Oh, sorry, it was sent to me privately. The question basically is, what policy changes, and this is specifically related to our colleges, if the policies that are created are specific to race or a group of people, doesn't that contradict the premise of equality?
Can I lay one over that so we can use some, since we like to use policy and we like to use theories that are out there to lay it over there. And the class I'm teaching today is procedural justice, and you all can Google that. It was put out by the COPS office, procedural justice. I'm not adept enough here to go in and put that up there, but what we're dealing with procedural justice has basically 4 pillars that we would be setting every policy on. And even in the procedural justice training, they talk about reviewing your policies and making sure they are procedurally just. So therefore, are they impartial? Are you getting the voice from individuals? Are you transparent? And is it fair? So you lay all of your policies on those particular things, it's there. Because now you begin looking at it, and this is what they got into in these big D1 schools and people going to prison over, is that when you have a bunch of money and you can pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get your kids into some of these highfalutin schools, you don't get in a jam. But when you're in the urban environment and you lie about your address so that you can get your kid in a school, then that's it. So I know that's not a policy in the community college setting, but we need to take that into consideration when we're doing our policies. Are we adding, like when we are doing our evaluation, and many times you have to accept individuals, and that can also be a hindrance. Because I have to accept you, but you haven't been prepared for the rigors of junior college, now we're setting ourselves up for failure, even though we're supposed to help the community. So we need to go back before that, and we need to set some policies in place as to what pipelines we have and what we've actually done to make sure our students are prepared for our rigors, so that our overall rating will be okay when they are rating us on our graduation rate.
And that's well said. And those are a few things that I was going to mention, but also just adding the access. You know, what are the access for our institutions? Again, that goes back. Does our college mirrors our community? Or the participation within our community welcome on some of our colleges? Do we have the same rights that another individual may have as they participate in various programs? Are we giving the same, you know, just the quality of access itself? Am I giving you 5% versus giving you the whole 2% of what you need to know to be successful? What are we doing to assure that those policies are transparent and allowing our individuals to be successful on our respective? You've got to remember, they're here to get their education, not to get harassed, not to be feel that they can't come to the campus and feel that they have the same access that everyone else has. Equal opportunity.
Well, you all look, it is 12:01. The chat is on fire. I have received several private messages. I think, Daniela, that we need a part 2 of this particular session so that we can continue this conversation. Let me say this. Thank you all. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Dr. G. Ryan and Alina. The information you all have been sharing has been eye-opening. I know many of us don't know a lot about law enforcement specific. We know about the communities we live in. Certainly those of us on the Zoom who work at colleges, we have relationships with our chiefs like Chief Book and Ryan, but to put it all together and really have an understanding of how it all should work is vitally important, especially during these times that we're living in. So I'd like to invite all of our panelists back again. Daniela, if I'm not out of turn here, to continue this conversation. We will get with you to see what your schedules will allow, and let's do part 2, because I think folks have additional questions for you. And we can, I think, just continue the conversation. Daniela?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And I definitely agree. That chat is on fire. Thank you to all of the panel members, Captain Woods, Alex Jordan, Alina Lawson, and my dear friend, Dr. Gregory Salters. Thank you so much for taking your time to come and share with us on such a very important and timely discussion today. As many of our schools are preparing to return, this is a very, very important conversation. As Alex Jordan said, from protest to policy to progressive collection action is what we all need to make it happen. And it takes all of us to hold each other accountable. We are the stakeholders and the faces of our community. So I look forward to continuing the conversation. If you're not a member of the Association of Florida Colleges Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Commission, join us today. We need you. Feel free to email me. I put my information in the chat. It's also on the My AFC Home website. And you can always reach out to Marsha Kiner or our president, Matt White, for more information. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Have a great one.
Y'all take care.
Have a great day.